Now, Lewis Hamilton has hit out at Formula One bosses and his fellow drivers for not doing enough to combat racism.
His comments come after drivers were not given enough time to take the knee before the Hungarian Grand Prix yesterday. Some also turned up late for the planned show of unity. So how important is this gesture? Do you need to take a knee to show solidarity?
Well, we're joined now by former professional footballer Clark Carlisle, who thinks this is just another diversion from actually tackling the core issues. Beauty expert and journalist Ateh Jewel, who believes taking the knee is symbolic and shows solidarity. We've got entrepreneur Steven Bartlett, who says we shouldn't seek to make people conform to these sort of gestures. And motorsport presenter for Eurosport, Rachael Downey, who thinks people should take the knee to show an understanding of the issue. Let's come to you first of all, Rachael. We know that the issues are incredibly important. I don't think anybody would dispute that, hopefully not anyway. But why is the gesture of taking the knee so important, do you believe?
Well, obviously, it's what it articulates, it's what it represents. But can you imagine how powerful that image would be if all the drivers took the knee before the start of a race? It shows solidarity, it shows that united front. And we've got to understand, you saw there football, cricket, they've all done that. Why can't motorsport do this? And motorsport is a well-oiled machine. They were the first international sport to come back during this COVID crisis. There is no reason why they can't. It's diluting their "We Race as One" message. It's looking a shambles, it really is. And they don't look like they are giving Lewis that support.
It's interesting, isn't it, Rachel? You'll know better than perhaps many of our audience who aren't into motorsport actually how divisive this has been within Formula One. Bernie Ecclestone, who was the former head of Formula One as well, coming up with some comments about race and race issues that didn't help the situation. Lewis is pushing back against that. A unified statement or gesture, something like this, of all the drivers coming together, would have resonated pretty resoundingly, I think. And some of them choosing to say, you know what, it's not that I don't support the cause, I just don't want to do this, has an interesting message behind it, it feels.
It does, and yes, I understand the knee isn't going to change the world overnight, but, you know, this, to me, is a visual representation of what is going on in motorsport, and motorsport does have a diversity problem, it really does. And this, to me, is showing everyone what is going on. And there's a social and economic exclusivity problem as well within motorsport. But can you imagine if we all did show that support, that united front? It would make a difference. And you mentioned there Bernie Ecclestone's comments before, and he's always had his very strong views and opinions, and that has damage motorsport, I think, a little bit. There's a lot we need to do, and taking the knee, I think, is going to go so far within motorsport. We just need them all to do this.
Clark Carlisle, I mean, you have said that you think actually in some ways things like this, gestures, can divert from tackling the real issues. But do you understand the point Rachel's making, which is that sometimes it needs a symbol to highlight it and get everybody's focus?
Good morning, Kate. And yes, of course I do understand that. You know, I was chair of the PFA where within football we've had the kick it out message going for many years, and having all the players wear those T-shirts before games, seeing the players in today's game taking the knee, it creates a powerful image. And this is an image-driven culture that we are sat in. So if you're talking about impressionable minds that may see their heroes or idols taking the knee, yes, it might spark a conversation. But what it won't do is it won't change the opinions, thoughts or actions of someone who does hold bigoted, prejudicial or discriminatory views. It's not going to make them address what's going on in their own lives. And it is, like we have repeatedly said, it's a gesture. Now, it's diverting away from the questions that should be asked in this scenario, which are, I don't know if you've got them to hand, if anyone out there is thinking, have a look at the team photos of all of the F1 teams. You can count on one hand the number of non-white faces at every team, and some of them have none at all. If you go further up the pay grade to the executives and the board, it's exclusively white. Now, these are the questions that we should be asking, are why is this the case, and what is F1 doing about it?
Why do you think it's the case, Clark?
Well, Rachel hit on something, you know, the socio-economic barriers to get into motorsport, especially if you're from a socially deprived community. But one thing I want to make clear here is this is not a blame game. When we have these conversations, people's defenses go up because they don't want to be blamed for the current situation. That's not the conversation we're having. The conversation we need to have is what is F1 doing with their billions to change the situation? Yeah. What are the pathways into motorsport, whether it be at engineer level? What is the representation in the upper echelons that show to young aspirational BAME individuals that they can aspire to achieve and grow within that sport? That's why I think that this conversation perpetuates what's going on, because we're talking about a gesture. That's not the question. That's not the argument. That's not the discussion that we need to have in.
OK, let's go to Ateh on that, because clearly, Ateh, I mean, Formula One is one of the richest sports out there. We can see that. There is, as Clark says, billions of pounds involved. And yet there is a huge lack of diversity within the sport itself. He doesn't believe the gesture is going to help that. And that's the more important question. What about you?
I strongly disagree. I mean, I completely understand the points that he's making, but symbols are powerful. We have all clapped every Thursday for months to honour the NHS and our NHS heroes. In your package, Boris Johnson said he didn't believe in gestures, but I'm pretty sure I saw him clapping for the NHS. In the same way, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, not the death, the murder of George Floyd has changed the world. And we all need to, instead of saying, I'm not racist, we need to be anti-racist. It's no longer acceptable to just say, I've got a T-shirt, I've got a black friend, get out of jail card. No. Lewis Hamilton, one of the best, most formidable sportsmen in history, in his sport, has asked his colleagues to support him in this gesture, in this symbol of ending racism, and they refused or didn't make time for it, and that is hugely problematic. There is a reason behind that, and we need to discuss that. It's about keeping the conversation going, and for all of us, together, we are all brothers and sisters. We all have to look after each other. In the same way, we all have to mask up, and it is complete privilege not to. We all have to take a knee and look after each other and end this now.
Stephen, it would have been very simple, wouldn't it, for those Formula One drivers to show that solidarity with Lewis Hamilton, who has reacted very clearly about this cause. He's reacted to Bernie Ecclestone's comments, that he described as ignorant and bigoted comments. And within a sport that has a huge lack of diversity, for them to stand there and say, look, we understand and we go with you, we're going to join you in this gesture, that would have been a very simple thing for them to do.
It would have been a simple thing to do, but I think there's a bit of more of an overarching point here, which is if we think about why systemic racism plays such a huge role in our society, it's often because of surface level prejudice. And from what I heard there, we're engaging in this idea that because of something we've seen on the surface, which is someone's choice of how they react to this very complex and personal issue of Black Lives Matter and racism that's happening, we're making a judgment on them that they must support racism just because they didn't act how we wanted them to act. And of course, we agree. I know that my previous panelist said that symbols are powerful, but change is even more powerful. And that's the central objective. And anytime we spend distracting ourselves about why hasn't that person kneeled, or why haven't they reacted in the way that we want them to act, or why is that statue up, is time and energy taken away from solving the systemic problem of racism, which, again, we must remember is the central issue.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it, Ateh, that Steve is making there, that just because someone does take the knee doesn't mean that they don't hold bigoted or racist views. And if someone doesn't take the knee, it doesn't make them a racist.
This is true, but I believe symbols are powerful. I am a dark-skinned black woman. I have 4C coily hair. You do not see representations of me very often on TV. Just last week, Edward Edifol, the editor of British Vogue, was stopped going into Vogue House, told to go around the loading bay. He was racially profiled. I worked at Vogue House. In my interview to get in the building, I was asked, do you feel more white because you have such a good education? I have a history degree from Bristol. University was built on slavery, from the money from the slave trade. This is a problem that is today and now. And I think we all need to come together to look and have the conversation. I think microaggressions, I think people don't really believe that racism is a bigger deal problem in the UK as in the US. And when we see our heroes and sportsmen taking the knee, it keeps the conversation going. We are having this discussion. Yes, I do not believe in cancel culture. Colin, the first NFL player who actually took the knee, his whole career was destroyed. He was cancelled because he leaned in and he believed in taking this political stand. It is not about pointing fingers. It's about keeping the conversation going. I have children. I do not want them to go through what I have gone through in my career to get here today to speak to you.
Well, Clark, I wonder what you make of Formula One's statement. It says ending racism and increasing diversity and inclusion in Formula One is a clear priority. We set out our plans for diversity and inclusion last November and have in recent weeks announced additional plans to create a task force to tackle these issues and a foundation with more than $1 million already donated to create apprenticeships and job opportunities for underrepresented groups. We want to make lasting change. Is that more what you'd like to hear?
That's definitely more what I'd like to hear, Kate. And it'll be very interesting to see the makeup of this committee, the people who are in the commission who are actually influencing the decisions that are made, because it's the people at the boardroom level who have the power to make decisions that affect the course of the sport. Is there a diversity of influence in there? Because this is what affects the sponsorships that are taken, the companies that are being endorsed, the people who are recruited to come through into that industry. This is what we need to be able to address, the thought patterns and the selection pools that are being targeted in these areas. And taking actions like that are a step in the right direction.